But when President Trump takes to the podium on the Capitol Hill tonight, he will, as Joe writes in his new Washington Post column, be delivering the State of the Union against a grim political backdrop. That backdrop includes low expectations and even lower approval ratings, a Republican Party and political class that no longer fears him. And 200 miles north of Washington, in the Southern District of New York, an investigation into all things Trump as federal prosecutors zero in on Trump's inauguration as they examine possible benefits to foreign donors. A lot closing in on the president.
Yeah, I mean, Willie, there have been times, I suppose, some of us can remember, maybe Bill Clinton going to Congress for a State of the Union address.
Right, and a little
perhaps in as bad of situation, perhaps maybe even a little worse. But, you know, Clinton had the ability to actually move the country with him when he spoke. Right. It's something that Donald Trump has not proven himself capable to do yet outside of, like, hockey arenas.
Well, the word from the White House about this speech is that it's going to be about comedy, C-O-M-I-T-Y, not comedy. To which we say it's a little late for that. I think the president, as a unifier, is not probably the right person to deliver that message. But as you point out in your column, it comes not just with progressives and Democrats running against him and railing against him, but Republicans now, when he's going to go up there and perhaps talk about the possibility of a national emergency, a declaration of a national emergency. Senate Republicans now, one by one, have been coming out, especially yesterday, and saying that is a terrible idea, led by the Majority Leader, Mitch McConnell.
Well, and Susan, that is what's so interesting leading into this. We've had Republicans that have been blindly loyal to Donald Trump over the past several years. They got trounced in the midterms, the worst election result ever in terms of vote differential in the 240-year history of this country. Then you have a government shutdown that goes terribly, and it's Donald Trump's government shutdown. And now you actually do have Mitch McConnell, saying that old quote, there's rarely an education from the second kick of a mule. And Mitch and the Republicans don't look like they're ready for a third kick of that mule. So they're not ready for confrontation.
It's interesting that obviously there's a difference with the State of the Union because Democrats control the House and it's Nancy Pelosi sitting over her shoulder. But Republicans have changed, too, compared with last year and the year before. And just look at the Senate vote yesterday on a different measure, on a resolution against the precipitous withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan and Syria, a direct confrontation to President Trump that passed 70 to 26. That is a warning sign to the White House that they no longer can count on Republicans to stick with them no matter what.
And only 3 Republicans, I guess, voting on the same side of the president.
Yeah,
Everybody else going with Mitch McConnell. Well, that doesn't really count, does it?
I mean, does that count on that vote?
No, it doesn't.
It really doesn't. No, it is. That's extraordinary. We'll see how Republicans react closer to home. I mean, they do have to look over their shoulder. Those who are facing re-election and potential primary challenges and stuff like that. I mean, they have to be wary of getting too far from Trump. At the same time, Susan is right. The weather has changed here.
It has. Another potential government shutdown looms over the State of the Union as a growing number of Senate Republicans are pushing back at the president's threat to declare a national emergency in order to build his border wall. GOP members are increasingly speaking out against the move, shooting down the possible path for the president to get his wall. In interviews yesterday, Republicans, including Senator John Cornyn of Texas, say they've made a number of public and private efforts to steer Trump away from trying to go around Congress.
I think it's a dangerous step. 1, because of the precedent it sets. 2, the president's going to get sued, and it won't succeed in accomplishing his goal. And 3rd, because I think Ms. Pelosi may well introduce a resolution of disapproval that will pass the House and then come over here and divide Republicans. So, to me, it strikes me as not a good strategy.
one way of
As
putting
Harry
it.
Truman would say,
Right.
let's mark him down as undecided.
Absolutely. As you heard Senator Cornyn say, a potential national emergency declaration by the president could result in Congress trying to block him by using a resolution of disapproval. If the Democratic-controlled House passes the resolution, the Senate would be forced to take it up and would require just 4 Republican defections, along with all the Senate Democrats, to rebuke the president. The president would then be forced to veto the measure intended to block him.
This is pretty simple.
I don't want this.
First of all, it's unconstitutional, and it's of all the examples of Donald Trump's own words being used against him by federal judges, no worse example for Donald Trump than this, where he's basically said, you know what, I'm going to negotiate. And if I don't get exactly what I want, then I'll declare a national emergency. There is not a federal judge anywhere appointed by any president that would uphold that national emergency. But worse than that, Michael, and I know you've heard this from Republicans just like me, worse than that, it gives future Democratic administrations the ability to say, wait a second, there's a school shooting. 36 kids were gunned down and killed.
That's right.
This is the 3rd month in a row. You know
wanna
what I'm
talk
going
about
to
a
do?
crisis?
I'm going to declare a national emergency, just like Donald Trump did with the wall. We're going to talk about public safety, and we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to sign into law those national background checks.
Yep.
I'm going to just sign into law a ban on military-style assault weapons. I'm just going to sign into law a ban on bump stocks.
And that would be
I'm
dealing
just
with an
going to
actual
sign into law
emergency.
and go down the steps, because again, you actually do have a number of deaths directly
I mean, that's an
related.
emergency.
That
Right.
is a national emergency. Most Americans would agree.
I think you've hit it right on the head, and it was very interesting the way Cornyn laid out his 3 points, because the first one dealt with what you just raised, and the third one dealt with the other political problem they have, and that is when it gets to the Senate, it won't take much to get those defections to walk away from the president, and the Republicans do not want the embarrassment of that, number one. But the other legislative problem is the one you just put your finger on. They know that this all comes back around real soon, potentially in 2020, right? And the reality of a Kamala Harris or any one of that particular, philosophical point of view in the White House declaring a national emergency on not just the environment. The environment is going to be easy.
Yeah.
It's on the stuff that cuts to the core of what Republicans have been arguing around the Second Amendment, et cetera. That's where the
By the way,
problem is.
using Donald Trump's logic, you could make that argument on the environment.
Yes.
You could make that argument on guns.
Absolutely.
You could make that argument on the national debt.
I would think all Republicans would be concerned.
Where you
They're
have
very concerned about
economists lining up one after another saying a $22 trillion national debt that continues
Emergency.
to spiral out of control
Emergency.
is a national economic emergency. It must be taken care of at once. A Democratic president, Kamala Harris, decides she's going to sign into law an emergency repeal of Donald Trump's tax cuts. Again, this is what Donald Trump is experimenting with, which is why, of course, there is no serious-minded Republican that would ever support this. You would have to be a bumpkin. You would have to be a fool. You'd have to be somebody with absolutely no knowledge of politics and the Constitution of the United States to think this is a good idea.
Well, I have one for you, Joe. Let's
No,
see
come
if
on.
the person you're describing
not.
meets
What are you
that
talking about?
standard. One top Senate Republican, at least, is warning his colleagues not to resist President Trump if he declares
do
a
that?
national emergency to
this?
get his wall.
Who's this
Speaking
person?
at his home state of South Carolina yesterday, Senator Lindsey Graham,
Wow.
the chairman of the
Okay.
Senate Judiciary Committee.
Wait, stop right there. He is the chairman of the Senate
Yes.
Judiciary Committee.
It's just
The
incredible.
person that you would hope would have a better working knowledge of the United States Constitution than anyone else. That really should, in a city that is rarely shocked anymore, that really should shock people in this city and in this country.
Well, Joe, maybe he'll convince you with his argument. Here's Senator
here we
Graham
go.
yesterday in South Carolina.
Convince us.
To every Republican, if you don't stand behind this president, we're not going to stand behind you when it comes to the wall. This is the defining moment of his presidency. It's not just about a wall. It's about him being treated different than every other president.
So Senator Graham went on to say, while he understands some of his Republican colleagues have concerns about the precedent that President Trump would set by declaring a national emergency, that it is, quote, no excuse not to have this president's back now because we're not doing anything exotic here, he said. Graham also says he does not expect Congress to come up with a deal to avoid another government shutdown after February 15th. So the argument goes the national emergency is the only way out to get the wall doing the president's bidding there in South Carolina.
And yet, Susan Page, it was one Lindsey O. Graham himself who said, what, last year when Republicans actually had control of the House and the Senate and the White House and the ability to build a wall, he said, it's not really a good investment.
So
he was against the wall. The Republicans were against the wall. Well, it's just like, what did Lindsey, didn't he call him crazy or something during the campaign?
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
You know,
we
this
called
is-
him a lot of
Destroy
things
the
during
Republican
campaign.
Party,
Yeah.
and if the Republican Party nominates him, they deserve to be destroyed.
But, you know, this is a sign of where President Trump continues to have a lot of sway, and that is with Republican primary voters. Lindsey Graham up for re-election, I think likely to face some kind of challenge from his right. And that is one thing that we talked about the president's weakness with Republicans now that we're beginning to see, that he also continues to have some strength.
Well, he does, but look, if you're a Republican senator, you're sitting there, and here are your alternatives. You're either going to have another shutdown, right? You're not going there, or you're going to have this emergency declaration that you know that is unconstitutional and will never work and will put you in a worse position, or you know you're going to have the wall go down. I mean, it's gonna. Those are your choices, and if you're a Republican senator looking ahead to a primary at some point, none of those is a good choice.
And Michael, this is yet again. You know, this is yet again. I'm just going to say, one of my favorite activities is going out and talking to people who ask me when I stopped becoming a conservative. Because that allows me to basically repeat my 1994 campaign agenda. And I'll say, free trade, where are you in free trade? Because I'm still for it. Balanced budgets, where are you in balanced budgets? Because I'm still for it. You know, low federal debt, where are you for it? Because I'm still for it. Entitlement reform, where? Because I'm still for it. NATO, where? Russia. And you just go down the list of the 20 things I ran on in 1994. You know another one? An out-of-control executive branch, right? An imperial presidency that would actually usurp constitutional powers from other branches. This is, and I think my fellow conservative brothers and sisters, not tainted by the stench of toadyism for Donald Trump, would agree with me here that actually this is one of the least conservative, with a capital C and a lowercase c, moves that Donald Trump has ever made. The suggestion that if he can't get what he wants through the normal give and take of Madisonian democracy, he'll declare a national emergency and seize the money, seize the power, seize the authority from the Article I branch.
Well, and what it speaks to is just how not Donald Trump's dumbing down of the political process, but how all those around him are dumbing it down as well, moving away from those values and those principles that you ran on, that I ran on when I ran for the U.S. Senate.
Let me ask you this, because when we ran on it, when I'd say something like that, everybody in the town hall meetings go, yeah.
Right.
When I talk about balancing the budget, yeah. We're going to fight an imperial president. Yeah. We're not going to build walls of protectionism. America is strong and we can defeat anybody economically. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, where have I know what Lindsey Graham's doing. Where have those people gone that we spoke to, those conservatives that we spoke to for decades? Where have they gone?
I think a number of them, a lot of them have become disillusioned over the years. They've become disillusioned by a lot of the things that they thought the Republican Party stood for and found out it didn't. So they retreated.
Hold on a second.
They retreated.
I became disillusioned. I wrote 3 books. You know what my 3 books say? The same exact thing.
He wrote
that the
3
Republican
exact same
Party,
books.
that the Republican, I reread them just to see if I was still a conservative, and I was like, how did I get away with writing the same 3 books? But hold on a second. My complaint, though, was not that they needed to find this mushy middle. It was that they were too liberal when it came to spending. They were too liberal when it came to not making tough economic choices. They were too liberal when it came to debts. They were too, so if you become disillusioned because your party is too liberal, you actually go to a lifelong Democrat who wants to seize power from
But you go to someone who you think is actually going to fight for the very things that you believe that you align on. So Trump made the Faustian bargain that if you stick with me, I'm going to go up that hill. The other guys didn't do it. Bush didn't do it. Reagan didn't even do it. I mean, he went after those leading figures in the establishment in a way that animated those voters who stepped back. Remember, after the 2004 election, what happened?
But, Michael,
a lot of Republicans retreated.
It was all showbiz.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with conservative policy, Gene. It had nothing to do with balanced budgets. In fact, Donald Trump promised he wasn't going to balance the budget, and he wasn't going to take on entitlement reform.
I know. He said
he
no
sounded
way.
like Nancy Pelosi. You know why? Because he spent his life contributing to Nancy Pelosi and Rahm Emanuel and the Democratic National Committee. So again, why are you, if you're those people listening to Lindsey Graham, why are you now supporting a guy who is more liberal than any Republican?
Well, because you've made you said Faustian bargain. You made the bargain. You're anti-abortion, and you want somebody who's at least nominally anti-abortion. You are pro religious freedom, and to you that you're probably anti-gay marriage, and
you're pro-religious freedom. Is that why you support a guy that supports Muslim registries? Do you not understand that a liberal may come in and maybe it'll be a Pentecostal registry next decade?
You don't think that far ahead. I think what you say. You say he's for religious freedom. I'm for religious freedom, and you're anti-Democrat. I mean, and nothing could be worse than having a Democrat in the White House. Even abandoning every single one of your principles.
There's a through line here from him not being a conservative and not being a Republican. So when he decided to run for president, someone told him building a wall would win you currency and capital.
Who's that
in the
someone?
Conservative movement? The people in his ear were
Roger
helping him.
Stone.
Who were helping, Roger Stone, who wanted to help him remember that as a device. So build the wall, build the wall. Gets into the White House. And he kind of abandons that idea. He controlled Washington and Congress, the House, the Senate, and the White House, kind of forgot about the wall. The minute it started to slip away, and the Washington Post on December 19th had a piece on the front page that said, Trump backs away from wall promise, he heard from Ann Coulter and Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity. And now because of that, when he had to remember what it meant to be a conservative, now we're here with a president on the precipice of seizing power, taking over appropriations that belongs to the Congress, and changing the presidency, frankly, in a way that we may be feeling for years and years.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham wants to rewrite the Constitution to give Kamala Harris the ability, as President of the United States, to seize Americans' guns, to seize guns in South Carolina, to start background checks, to do all the things that Lindsey Graham supposedly is against.
Well, we're going to revisit this great conversation. We have a lot of other big stories to get to, spreading them out and digging deep, including something we mentioned at the top of the show. Investigators now probing the president's inauguration, looking for documents on donors, vendors, and finances. What's behind the new wide-ranging subpoena?
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.